Welcome back to The Responsible Edge, the podcast where we explore the bold ideas, uncomfortable truths, and unexpected solutions shaping the future of ethical business. Today on the show, we're confronting the uncomfortable blueprint behind the UK's construction boom, where net zero rhetoric collide with concrete-heavy reality. And we're grounding this in the Financial Times article, Materials Rethink Underpins Architecture's Sustainability Push, which exposes how architects are revisiting ancient materials, timber, stone, and even mud to offset the environmental sins of a sector addicted to concrete and short-term builds. I'm absolutely delighted to say, after many, many months having previously met, that our guest today is Saul Humphrey, Managing Partner of Saul Humphrey LLP, Professor of Sustainable Construction at Anglo-Ruskin University, and incoming President of the Chartered Institute of Building. Saul, it's absolutely fantastic to have you on the show this morning. Thank you so much for giving up some of your time.
Charlie, thank you very much for having me. It's delighted to be here. It has taken a while, but I'm really looking forward to it.
Excellent stuff. Excellent stuff. Now, Saul, I've given you, and again, doing a bio for you is a very tricky and challenging thing to do because, I mean, we don't want to necessarily give everybody war and peace from the outset, but I want you to get, perhaps if possible, just give us a little bit more meat on the bone in terms of what you're currently working on, your current positions, what's occupying your time.
Yeah, well, you've nailed the most important ones, although that's immediately disrespectful to the others. I didn't mean to do that. They'll forgive me. Yes, so my sort of day job is my own consultancy, Saul Humphrey LLP. My wife and I are partners in that. It's a B Corp. And essentially, we try and deliver more sustainable construction solutions. That typically means project managing schemes that might be BREEAM outstanding or Passive House or LEED Platinum or Neighbours or following the new net zero carbon agenda. We're trying hard to shift the emphasis towards more sustainable development, following the SDGs, and really using the Mark Carney values link to do that. Telling someone they must be good, telling someone they must be more sustainable is not necessarily that compelling an idea. But if you can link it to a stronger value proposition, better whole life costs, premium values, avoiding stranded assets, that kind of narrative, then I think you can actually shape a very commercially sound reason to do what I think is the right thing to do. So that's the day job. And then the other things you mentioned, like being a professor at Anglo-Ruskin University, I'm a rubbish professor. So I'd overseen some PhD doctoral students. I do some guest lectures, master classes, and that kind of thing. But I really like what they're doing and trying to help the next generation to bring this subject matter forward and be much cleverer than I am is part of the ambition.
And Saul, I'm just going to jump in there. What makes you a bad professor?
Oh, I don't think I do enough lecturing. I don't think I do enough research. I'm kind of too busy doing other stuff to really give as much attention to it as I would like, because it's quite time demanding, and I'm part-time. So I admire all those that are full-time professors and are deeply into their research and propositions and are cited thousands of times and publishing lots of papers. I look at them in awe and wish I had more time to emulate them in a modest way.
Do you not, just on that though, like I imagine if we were able to just, survey your students now, I would imagine they would push back perhaps and say it's brilliant to have somebody who's got such practical, insight and experience to come in and help give perhaps a different, less academic, perhaps focused view. Is that not?
Sure, I think it's really fine. I think that's the ambition. Yeah, if I can bring into an academic environment more contemporary, real life examples of what's happening today, then that can compensate perhaps for my lacking in academic rigor. So yeah, maybe I'm a compromise, but that's it. And the role at the Chartered Institute of Building that you mentioned, and I'm senior vice president at the moment, which means I've got another year to wait until it's my turn to be president. And I'll carry a theme into that presidency, and I'll have a year to try and not overly reshape the paradigms. I think Chartered Institute of Building is doing a terrific job. I know you've had Amanda Williams on before. She's great too. But my emphasis will be around more sustainable construction. That's my sort of go-to hobby horse, my passion, my vision, my purpose. And I will do my best to nudge the agenda more towards that during my year. But we've got something like 52,000 members in 100 countries. So it's a bit of an honor, a bit of a privilege to have a chance to talk to them directly, to listen to them directly, and to perhaps just a tiny bit of influence on the agenda, on the position.
Well, so I think it's immediately there are guests that we have on the show that you just feel slightly privileged to be interviewing, and I have to say, even with the self-deprecating way that you've introduced yourself, I think it's a joy to have you on. I want to learn a little bit more about the origin story and what's ultimately led you. You mentioned that sustainable construction is a passion of yours. It's what you want to lead the CIOB on, if you like, when you come into your presidency. But let's go back to where does that come from? So if you can start us, whether or not it's in childhood and experiences you can recall there, or perhaps into the early part of your your education, or perhaps later part of your education, or early part of your career. Just take us back and give us a bit of a story, if you like, of your origin and why this stuff matters to you.
Yeah, I went to grammar school, so I was perhaps fortunate to go through that process, but that also dates me, doesn't it? Grammar schools and then in the UK education system, you'll know what that means. But I wasn't a brilliant student. I was perhaps a bit immature. But the opportunity arose when I was 16 to go on what was then called the government's youth training scheme, YTS scheme, paid £25 a week. And you were kind of in employment and doing, for me, what became obvious was the ONC and the HNC in construction. So two sort of technical qualifications. And that was instead of A-levels. So it's a bit left field to do that from a grammar school, not to do A-levels, not to go to university in the conventional form. But I was lucky enough to be placed with a regional building contractor called R.G. Carter. And I stayed there. I stayed there for 33 years. And progressed quite well, really enjoyed the company, met my wife there. So, it's a huge part of my life. But during the twilight stages of that part of my career, we did get to build some BREEAM excellent buildings. We did win the project to build the Passive House scheme on Goldsmith Street that went on to win the Sterling Prize. We did various other greener buildings, and you start to get a little bit more interest in the topic. But I left there and went to I left R.G. Carter and went to Morgan Sindall as managing director in the East, and I joined just as they were finishing off the University of East Anglia's Enterprise Centre, which was acclaimed at the time to be perhaps the greenest building in the country. It was house, it was BREEAM outstanding, and I don't deserve much kudos for what those guys had done beforehand. The people that worked on that project did all the work. I just turned up late and enjoyed it. But these things do influence you. You do experience it, you shape it, you realize the narrative. There was a lot happening around that time, which was raising awareness of the climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis that we face. I've previously done sort of master's degrees and PhDs to compensate for my missing education at the start. I went back and did that later. And I joined the world in professional institutions. So I was trying to sort of make up for lost ground whilst in employment and always sort of learning. And again, your LinkedIn profile is something that I would encourage all of our listeners and viewers to go and check out and to see the full kind of plotted history of what you've done and sort of the you can see that very much, I think, in terms of what you've described there, in terms of acknowledging the areas that you wanted to sort of fill the gaps, if you like, and look to develop and build yourself along your career. But I want to ask you, I want to pick you up on that point about, you became increasingly aware of the climate crisis yourself personally. Can you talk us through like any of those particular instances that you can recall that really kind of shook you, if you like, to your core and said, look, this is something that I want to help address with my work? Yeah, I think there was thought leadership sessions going on. I started to get a bit involved in Institute of Directors. Started to chair a thing called Building Growth, which was the region's sector group looking at construction and its impact on the economy. So I was asked to do more things for the region from a construction perspective. And you're mixing with different people from different sectors with different ideas, many of whom I could name check, but I don't know if they'd appreciate me doing so. But people like Jonathan Smales at Human Nature, people like Andy Wood at Adnams, Mark Goyder at Tomorrow's Company, Charles Handy, the philosopher who wrote Second Curve. I could go on. You meet lots and lots of people, and they all leave you with something. Those individuals left me with something that was positive and thought-provoking and inspiring, and led me to want to just shift my emphasis from construction and the capital pursuit of more turnover, more revenue, more profit, more cash, grow, which aligns well with a private sector or a PLC's ambition if you take that simplistic narrative as to what our purpose is. But if you start to think about our footprint, our impact, our purpose, then you can start to want to blend that, I think, and see if we can do that in a more sustainable way, a more inclusive way. When you read things, you've got Noah Harari's book Sapiens, you'll have done that. You'll have done Matthew Syed, Simon Sinek. You'll have done these. But I think Duncan Wallace-Wells, I think it's probably 6 or 7 years ago now. There's certain books that you read, certain things that you see that I think his is called The Uninhabitable Earth, and it's one of those sort of paradigm moments where you. Oh my word! Whatever are we doing? And so lots of influences, lots of things, lots of people, lots of organizations, lots of books.
Yes,
to start to more than start, that progress your interest into something more real.
And so that was brilliant. And we will, and thank you so much for name checking, because we now get to link to all of those names and all the various resources as a result, which will be brilliant. So thank you for doing that. I think there were some brilliant ones there. Again, reflecting back here and looking at your career, then you've described it there that, there was almost that fairly traditional, corporate singular focus, if you like, throughout most of your, the early part of your career in terms of profit, in terms of developing the businesses that you were involved in and that you were running. Ultimately, now working on something that sort of looks to fuse that outcome with a more positive impact-led outcome in terms of the environment, in terms of our sustainability within it. Like, what's that done for you personally in terms of your satisfaction for your work? Like, does it if you like a before and after? And if so, like, what does it feel like?
I think there's things that align. I'm still building buildings, still leading teams that design and deliver buildings. And I've always felt it's really important to be with the right people. So by being lucky enough to work with the right teams, the right professionals, the right clients, but in particular, the right staff and the right colleagues, they can make people like me look better, and they can deliver much better outcomes. So that's crucial and consistent. I think the question you're asking, which is a clever one, is about how do you feel if you're delivering something that's more aligned to a values proposition, to delivering a purpose, a mission that's feels right and goes beyond just simple short-term shareholder value. And the answer is it's massive. It's colossal. It's the why, isn't it? There's a real purpose for what you do. So I feel much more complete in knowing there's a reason for this, and there's if we can do it this way, we're doing it better. And if we can encourage others to emulate that, or support and applaud those who are already doing it better than us, then we can help everyone get that. So that would be the desire.
I love it. And I think, I was hoping that you were going to sort of respond with something akin to what you've just described. Out of interest, when you think about this point in your career and you think about the rest of your career, if we are looking back at the end, like, what would success of this stage of your career look like? What would you reflect on and think that was time well spent?
I don't think it's about me. I think looking back, it's almost lots of chance and circumstance, isn't it? It's the sliding doors moments. It's those. It's not as strategic as it sounds. I didn't sit down and plan this journey and think that's what I'm going to do then. If I do really well at that, I might be lucky enough with this. It's much more circumstantial. I remember listening to Mark Carney's Reef lecture one day after he'd written the values book, and your sort of interest is piqued because you know a bit about the person, and you listen to it again, and you might have missed it. You might not have been in the car that day when it was on. You might not have happened. There's so many situations like that where it's not as planned or as structured as I'd like to pretend. But looking back, I'm pretty happy with where we're at, where I'm going, where the business is going, my role. I'm far less happy with where the world is going, where the industry is going, where the discussion is going, and the temperatures are rising and the carbon in the atmosphere is increasing and our quest for growth doesn't abate. So I think, much beyond me and my humble existence is a reality that frightens me. And I don't think we should be complacent and self-congratulatory for a moment when our job is far from done.
Hear, hear. You're going to get your first hear of the show, Saul. I give them out for guests that I think absolutely, and again, even just in the introduction of yourself, the humility that you show, and I think is incredibly refreshing. And also, you're right, like within the context that we find ourselves, that is paramount that we shift the focus from ourselves to perhaps, the wider issues at play. So I think that's a brilliant message to kind of perhaps conclude our introduction to you on, which I know was a short fire hit, and there's much that we could go into. Maybe if you've enjoyed it, we might be able to get you back on and we can dive into some of the other chapters, if you like, in a bit more detail. But for now, Saul, would you mind possibly just providing a bit of a summary introduction and overview to the article that we're going to be pulling apart together?
Yeah. Financial Times. Interesting, their take on life and their position on all things regarding climate sustainability, the economy and growth. I think the FT finds itself in an awkward position sometimes, but it's less obvious if it's, what you're going to get from The Guardian, going to the left, and you're going to get from The Telegraph. The FT, I think, sometimes is much more objective and considered, and I'm not saying either of those papers are always wrong or always right, but the FT, you kind of know what you're going to expect. This particular article, the one we're referring to, is predominantly about materials, and with that, we're thinking embodied carbon in construction. We often rush to think that construction, the issues might be about whether you've got a gas boiler or an electric air source heat pump, whether you've got PV on your roof or you haven't. Mm-hmm. And they're very valid and important issues, which the latest iteration of the Future Homes Standard and other changes in building regulations are addressing. That's very much operational carbon. It's the carbon that we burn to heat or to cool or operate our buildings. What we often forget about is the embodied carbon, the carbon that's inherent within some of the materials that we use, particularly cement and steel and those that are produced with arc furnaces and the like, and fossil fuels burning to reach temperatures that we need. So this article, the FT article that you were referring to, was called Materials Rethink Underpins Architecture's Sustainability Push. So spot on. It's about looking at materials and their impact and questioning our obsession with concrete and steel, and nudging a consideration of more natural materials, timber, for me, hemp, materials that can grow quickly, absorb, sequester carbon, and lock it into a building. Things like rammed earth, things like stone, natural materials that have been around for millions and millions of years and will be thereafter. Materials that are easier to recycle, to use again. And it's, absolutely. That's definitely what we should be doing. Now, I think they say that if cement was a country, it would be the third biggest polluter of all. If steel was a country, it would be fifth. So whilst we're pointing at China and America and saying, look how bad you are, we could look at the mirror and say, how much cement are you using? How much steel are you using? How many bricks are you laying? Because these products aren't great, far from it. And as we start to use more and more renewable energy to operate our buildings, as we switch from gas or oil towards electric for our heating systems, you can see the operational carbon footprint from the built environment reducing fast. And great, that can't happen soon enough. But we're stubbornly resisting the change to our materials, to the embodied carbon. That's currently about a third of all the emissions in the built environment are a product of the embodied carbon. But as the emissions from the grid as we shift towards renewable energy on the grid, as that reduces, the embodied carbon becomes more and more of an issue because it will soon be our heaviest footprint. It will soon be the biggest part of our concern.
And so that was, by the way, that was a brilliant introduction. And for anyone of our listeners and viewers that wants to check out the FT article themselves, we'll obviously link to it in our various materials. But Saul's done a brilliant job of, I think, highlighting the key elements of the piece. Picking up on that point, though, Saul, in terms of, with that resistance that we feel as a sector, if you like, towards moving away from steel and concrete and towards these more natural materials, 64 perhaps $1 trillion question. I don't know how big the opportunity is here, but why is that? Like, what is it that's stopping us from transitioning?
Yeah, there's 101 reasons. I think one of them is the Grenfell legacy with the horrific disaster, Grenfell Tower, and all those that sadly perished. The immediate focus was on making sure that buildings are constructed on materials and wrapped in materials that cannot possibly be combustible. And the instinct is to say that means things like cement and concrete are good, steel's pretty good, bricks are good, and timber feels like it might be less so. So there's a natural instinct to think that we go back to the materials that we can trust in a fire situation. Ironically, it wasn't the timber that was anything to do with the fire at Grenfell. There was no hemp. We've probably overreacted to that. And domestic construction for 2-story houses, etc. There's absolutely no reason why we shouldn't be using more bio-based materials. And I think we really should. And
sorry, Saul, just for my uneducated mind, why specifically for domestic 2-story buildings should we? What's the difference?
Structurally simpler. The Building Safety Act's now come in and brought in some stricter guidelines on the construction methodology of higher buildings. If you go 7 stories or above, you're going to be encountering the new regulatory change. And with that, it's going to be harder to, I think, persuade somebody that a timber solution is right for a building of that nature. But where it's lower in height and easier to escape from, then I think the issues are much easier to address, much simpler. And the resistance question that you asked, why are we not just doing it? I think it's more to do about familiarity and supply chains and cost. We know where to get concrete, we know where to get bricks from, we know where to get blocks from. Timber frames are often used in housing, but we tend to still dress them with a brick facade. That's something we've always done. I say always. In recent years, we've always done. We expect to see that. But a lime render on a Savelit board or on a hemp backing with a timber frame, that would be great. My own house, I'm here at home today. It's in my study, but the house is over 400 years old. It's a timber frame building, and it's wrapped in a lime render. It's 400 years old and it's doing okay. I'm not trying to advocate we should build all homes this way, but we should certainly do a lot more. And I think that's the issue of using more sustainable materials, of reducing the embodied carbon, is what this article's nudging us to do. And I applaud it. It should definitely be on our agenda and be promoted hard.
And brilliantly, and again, here you could second here of the show on that point, Saul. But out of interest, the article alludes to the fact that we are starting to see a shift, taking your point about Grenfell and perhaps some of the other kind of status quo elements that require us to continue to use this kind of traditional materials that we've built most of our built environment with into account. Like what things need to be done in order to increase the speed of adoption? Like, is that the influence of policy? You mentioned the CIOB at the beginning in your presidency. Is that, like, when you talk about sustainable construction, is that part of it that you're going to look to affect change in that way? Just touch upon what needs to be done to accelerate things.
Yeah, that would help no end. I mean, I think it's interesting. We've got companies like Google. You'll have seen their new headquarters going up at King's Cross, the ground scraper, I think it's called. But you can build a big building like that with a combination of CLT, cross-laminated timber, glulam's another product that you can get decent spans, decent structure with a timber-based solution, far lighter footprint than steel or concrete. You can achieve high BREEAM outstanding type aspirations. You can have a building that sings and cries sustainable construction. It can be all renewable energy. I'm not advocating 1 second that Google always get it all absolutely right, but on that building, they've done a lot more right than wrong. Yeah, the green roofs, that kind of thing. And I think that sort of building will have a premium value. It'll be much more desirable. There's evidence that correlates with this, that it'll be cheaper to run, the whole life costs will be reduced, it will be a more desirable building to work in, it will be a more pleasant atmosphere, it'll have better air quality, and it's demonstrably had a lighter impact on the environment. And if you look at products like hemp that can absorb far more carbon than they ever, than the rest of the building that emits, then you can get a carbon positive solution. So I think, we've got to push these natural materials harder. There's going to be resistance because they've got to be grown somewhere. And that's often land that's being valuably used to grow crops. Although often those crops are feeding the animals so that we can eat more meat, but that's perhaps digressing too far. I think there's deeper societal issues, and there's often need a sort of systems approach to this. You can't just say, do that and it will fix it. What's the consequence of that? What's the knock-on? What's the impact? And, that's complicated.
And so you're the perfect podcast guest because you literally respond and tee up my next question that I was going to ask you, which is perfect. Like, I was going to ask you, like, the sort of, I guess the elephant in the room question when it comes to, envisaging a future, if you like, whereby we have managed to completely change the way that we think about materials in construction. And we've adopted a lot of these natural materials, and concrete and steel have much less of an impact in terms of what we're building. What's the trade-off? Like, what is the negative consequence perhaps in that and the journey that we go on to get there? Are there any? Or is it just, no, we just need to do it?
Yeah, I think in the immediate, so the supply chains are not that mature. So the certainty of materials, the certainty of their performance, the regulations, the criteria that asserts and gets warranties and ensures, that all of that needs to be developed further. But there are solutions that are well known around CLT and glulam, which can run today. But we need more robust supply chains. We need deeper certainty deliveries at a price that's affordable. And I think very often there is a perception that more sustainable buildings cost more to build. And if it's not commercially viable, then developers, investors won't do it. Finding that magic place where we can harmonize cost and value, supply chain resilience, performance, that as the weeks, months go on, I think we're getting closer and closer to that more robust solutions being reliable. So I can see that happening naturally as we progress. What we need to probably do is accelerate it, to encourage it, to support it, and seek grants. And but we're focusing very much on new build, aren't we? And let's not forget the existing stock that remains, and the vast majority of it will still be with us in 2050 when we're meant to be at net zero. So we've got to also work on those 26 million homes that are still going to be here. We've got to retrofit them. We've got to shift them to renewable energy. We've got to celebrate those existing buildings and use them more. We've got to, before we start thinking too much about new build, we've got to think about the buildings we've already got, and are they ready to operate in a net zero world? Can they be adapted to be more resilient, to cope with the changing weather we're now experiencing? But with that, we're not quite sure which way it's going to go, but I suspect you'll take me back there. And we've got to stop demolishing things. We've got to start looking at buildings that already exist that are unoccupied or underutilized and say, can we repurpose it? Can we refurbish it? Can we change its use rather than knock it down? Because that's the most sustainable buildings, the one that's already been built. And
so picking up on that point, and it kind of goes back to actually a point that you made during the introduction to yourself, if you like, when we were talking through that. What's we have this horrible contradiction at play in many ways in our modern world between, as you've alluded to, growth and economic stimulation and development and progress, if you like, coupled with the sustainable choice, if you like, just within what you've just described there in terms of a retrofit, regenerative approach, if you like, to construction versus demolish, rebuild, etc. Just touch upon how attitudes need to change, if you like, in terms of the economic underpinning of the sector. I'd love to get your view on that.
There's a really deep sort of philosophical, profound mistake that we make. We shape our whole political and economic agenda around growth. And I think you could put a number of semi-illiterate people in a room and say, is perpetual growth on a finite planet possibly sustainable? Well, it just simply can't be, can it? It's impossible. We keep growing our population, our consumption, our housing, our buildings, our cars, our flights, our holidays, our electronic goods, whatever it is we're seeking more of. I think in the developed world, we've got enough. But it's not very popular to say sufficiency is what we should aspire to. Mm-hmm. I think it's Klein and Thompson's book that's just come out called Abundance. It's not quite as bad as it sounds. It's not all about excess. It's far from that. It's suggesting that we do need an abundance of good housing, of good health, of good education, but we don't need an abundance of everything. So I think there's a blend of, but we need to have that sort of conversation, because I think it's really difficult to sell the degrowth narrative that Kate Raworth's Donut Economics has positioned that quite cleverly, and Jason Hickel's famous for his work in that arena. But I don't think today that wins the next election. I think the population are seeking something more than what they had before, something better, and that when you position it, are you happy with what you've got? Probably many people would say not entirely. Many more would say not at all. So they want change, and they want to have more, not less. So I think how we frame this whole narrative against that starting reality that I said about perpetual growth is really hard. And I think finding that social tipping point where we can encourage people to do the right thing before we risk the climate or biodiversity tipping point that takes us the other way is where we find ourselves today. I think it's an amazing moment in time where this could go either way.
So that's you've explained that so beautifully and so eloquently and so terrifyingly at the same time. So thank you for both inspiring me and scaring me in equal measure. But I couldn't agree with you more. And I think the thing for me is when I read articles like this piece that's been put together, it can all be caveated, but with really what you've just described. And that's the true largest elephant in the room that we really do need to get a handle on is clearly that the overarching system and motivation behind the system is geared to not allow these sorts of innovations to realize the outcome that they're trying to achieve. So how does that, when you find yourself on a podcast with me talking about this and reflecting on it, like, how do you not get disillusioned at that point? How do you manage to still stay, positive as you are, that we can make that right choice that you've just described?
Yeah, because I think the despair, the doom prediction, there's been a few people recently, far more eloquent and qualified than me, who have already said it's too late. It's gone beyond the tipping points. We've initiated them. There's too much greenhouse gas in our atmosphere. It's going to be there for hundreds of years. We're continuing to emit more. It's gone too far. We have already pushed it. The tipping points are running. They don't all happen immediately. They don't all happen obviously. And there's something in that. And it's worrying, and it can lead you to a state of despair if you think that's happened and we're now going to witness the feedback loops and the cascade effects that will amplify and accelerate the climate breakdown that we're experiencing. So that's terribly frightening. But it could lead you to say it's too late, give up. And I think that would be a really, really bad answer. I think for every fraction of a degree that we can abate, that we can save, 2 degrees is bad. 2.5 is awful. 3 degrees is shocking. But 2.9 is better than 3. 2.8 is better than 2.9. If for every 10th of a degree that we can avoid, we can save our livable planet for more generations for longer. So I think we've got to do our damnedest to recognise that and to continue to mitigate emissions. But I do think there's a reality that says that we've witnessed the 10 hottest years in the last 10 years of our lives. That's ridiculous. The temperatures in our seas, the temperatures in the UK today, it's the frequency of storms, the intensity. We know it's happening. We know we've gone too far. I see little sign of that abating quick enough to give us real hope. But all we can do is keep promoting it. Podcasts like this, Charlie, give people like me and others who are far cleverer a platform to help in that regard. We've got the UN SDGs, that the 17 that we can position and ensure that we do the right thing in the right way. We've got various initiatives. Ed Miliband's recently just made a speech which has been much clearer about holding us to account and recognizing the state we're in. But politically, there's a moment in time where we could shift one way, and we've watched what's happened in America. And we could get a political movement that encourages us to not do what I'm alluding to. Equally, we could get one that goes the other way. So that social sitting, the point that I allude to, is just that. It's which the platforms like this give us the chance to nudge it back, to ease people to think less about growth and less about fossil fuels and continuing the status quo, and more about shifting towards doing the right thing urgently, because I think that's what we have to do.
And again, you're so good at responding to tee up the next question. I want to, in light of what you just remarked, and that need to convince those minds to view things in that way. If I was to you started your CIOB presidency, you have got the 20, 30, 40, 50 most influential leaders in the construction sector in the UK in the room with you. What do you say to them to get them to begin to make decisions that align with that, the right road, if you want to call it that?
Well, I think you always start with the reality of what we face today. We know from simple graphs that show rising carbon emissions, graphs that show rising temperatures in perfect parallel, going back over hundreds of years. The evidence is really, really clear. The science is really well known. And I don't want to be remembered as being part of the problem. I'd much rather have a legacy that I made a slight positive contribution and I was part of this solution. And I think most people would. So that short-term quest for nailing this year's targets or this year's profits or next year's increased revenue, I think we have to bring that back into a more of an ESG lens and think more holistically about the environmental, social, and governance structure that enables us to deliver that. And doing that more sustainably, I think, will actually protect the legacy of those 40, 50 individuals that you allude to. They'll be remembered more for that than whether or not they hit next year's target or not. They've got to still run businesses that are commercially viable and sustainable. But I think the best businesses will be those that do that and align to a livable planet. They'll be the ones that have got the greatest shareholder value. They'll be the ones that are trading at a premium, that are recognized as being truly sustainable commercially as well as environmentally. Having a business that profits today but destroys the chance for future tomorrow, I think that's a positive message for anyone.
And crucially, and I love how you've described that, crucially what we're saying is that those leaders of those businesses, those organizations, there is an opportunity at play here to sit on the right side of history and to be revered in time for a legacy of making the right decision and looking to support a different outcome than the one that we could possibly head down. So it's almost sort of trying to get across that compelling opportunity at play, if you like, for the leaders of our construction sector in order to make the right choice.
John, I agree. And I think many of them are already on that pathway. Many of them are fully aware and are doing their best and doing much more than me and much more than others to deliver that. And I applaud them all. But the risk is then we're preaching to the choir. And I think there's a risk, even with this podcast, even with your huge following, there is a risk that a certain type of individual listens to this or watches this, and there's a certain type of person that wants to represent their industry at a higher level. But the population as a whole is what we're trying to communicate this to and encourage all of us to do the right thing. And it's really hard to get that message to disseminate and be heard when there was actually a counter message being broadcast loudly, which can seem more appealing in the short term if you don't hear or listen to it all.
And is that because basically the counter message is, don't worry, you don't need to change anything about the way that you operate, the way that you view the world. You don't have to go through that uncomfortable human experience of having to alter the way that you do things or view the world. And then you can stick where you are. That's the message. It's very appealing.
That's the one, Charlie. That's the one that says we can't afford net zero. That's the one that says we're only 1%. That's the one that says what little impact can we have, and that EVs are destroying the planet, or all those solar panels that are ruining our fields. It's too easy to find an argument that goes against it. You haven't got to scratch the surface too deeply to know that the status quo cannot possibly be allowed to continue. We are destroying our only planet, and we've got to change.
We've got to change. Now, I'm intrigued to kind of conclude now and ask you the magic wand question in light of exactly what we've just described. And I'm hoping that we can, and again, I'm not telling you how to use your magic wand, Saul, but I'd like us to find its way, if possible, of being able to frame an optimistic end to the show if we can. So let me ask you, if I was to hand you a magic wand, and you've changed one thing about the commercial world this instant, what would that one thing be?
The commercial world this instance, it would be to encourage all to look for longer term outcomes. I think the short term quest for hitting targets and profits and revenue leads to profoundly inappropriate decisions. If we thought about the impact on the next generation or our ancestors, or we took a longer term position on everything we do, we'd actually decide much better outcomes. I think if we stop thinking about today's profit but tomorrow's livable planet, we'd reach the right decision on everything we think about.
You've given us the title of the show, I think. Less profit, more livable planet, I think, is a lovely way to coin the outcomes that we need to see. So thank you so much. That was, I know, as I say, a whistle-stop tour through things, but some really interesting insight there. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks, John. I've really enjoyed it.
And that's all for today's episode of The Responsible Edge. A huge, huge thank you to Saul Humphrey for reminding us that sometimes the most radical blueprint is the decision not to build, and that the true hallmark of sustainable architecture might be restraint, not reinvention. As a reminder, this episode was brought to you by TrueMark, the independent mark of integrity for sustainability reporting. Because trust isn't declared, it's earned. Visit truemark.com to learn more. I'm Charlie Martin. Thanks for listening. And don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave us a review. See you next time.